deductive or deductive approach. The deductive approach, you basically deduce your hypothesis based on theoretical considerations in a particular domain which is then subjected to empirical scrutiny. In simple terms, it's basically having your theory and basing your hypothesis on that theory, after which you collect data to try and prove that hypothesis. Based on what sort of data you get, you then analyze it, and the findings determine whether or not your hypothesis is confirmable or refutable. In the event it is confirmed, you're at liberty to then revise the theories. However, there's a tendency that theory may change during this process as a result of one of two things. In the event some other researcher is working on the same theory, his hypothesis might have changed current theory you're working with, and as such, you will have to change your theory. Or the data you have been able to collect does not fit your hypothesis. With the inductive approach, which the semi-structured interview encompasses, it's basically when you commence your research from an inductive position and seek to build up a theory based on adequately grounded data. You basically have no sort of theoretical framework to work with. It's just basically observable data. You try to get a fine line between your observable data and hypothesis and develop questions to test these. The inductive process basically starts with a rough definition of the research question, after which you generate a hypothetical explanation of the research question. Based on that hypothetical explanation, you examine cases that are in line with it. You either have deviant or non-deviant cases. In the event you have deviant cases, you either reformulate your hypothesis and examine cases based on this reformulated hypothesis, or you refine the hypothetical explanation to exclude the deviant case, end the examination of cases and data collection, and come up with a theory. Or in the event you have no deviant cases, you end your examination as well and data collection and come up with a theory. With the semi-structured interview, there are quite a number of limitations, first of which is the need to be familiar with the topic. In conducting the semi-structured interview, you need to be familiar with the topic you're researching on, because this is what is going to help you in asking the right follow-up questions. For instance, if you were conducting an interview with a project manager about project management processes and you ask him about his risk management plan, and he tells you, oh, that his input into the risk management plan is his lessons learned session. If you're not a project manager or you do not know about project management terms, you would not know what a lessons learned session is, you would not know what the risk management plan is, and as such, you will not be able to ask the right questions. In our example paper, information about the history of the project and organization was essential in developing the semi-structured interview guide as well as asking the right follow-up questions during the semi-structured interview. Another limitation is low response rates and willingness of interviewees to be interviewed. Some respondents personally see semi-structured interviews as a non-value-adding activity to them. They basically see it as a waste of time, especially if they're being paid on an hourly basis. They won't want to take time off work to sit in for a semi-structured interview which they do not feel will benefit them in any way. In our example paper, the interview subjects were busy, active, and pragmatic people for whom reflection was seen as both difficult and time-wasting. It was up to the researchers to convince these people on the need to have this research carried out. Okay. With the semi-structured interview, there's also a range of skills that need to be possessed. You have to have a certain range of interpersonal skills, such as Val lists some qualification criteria for an interview, namely being knowledgeable, being familiar with the topic, structuring, clear and gentle, asking simple questions in a manner that can be easily understood by the interviewee. You also have to be sensitive, open and steering, directing the course of the interview in line with your research topic or area. You also have to be critical in the sense that the interviewee's responses, there may be discrepancies in the responses. You also have to be remembering so you could ask the right follow-up questions, as well as interpreting, so you could basically make sense of what the interviewee is saying without putting words in their mouth. In our example paper, the interviewees actually commended this skill in the interviewers in the sense that they were not able to previously articulate their thoughts and opinions on certain issues. It was due to the interpersonal skills of the interviewer that they were able to articulate these. Semi-structured interviews can also be time-consuming. Time-consuming in the sense that it takes roughly about an hour or two to conduct a standard semi-structured interview. And for that hour or two, you need to spend about 7 to 8 hours transcribing data gotten from that semi-structured interview. That's a total of about 8 hours in all. In our example paper, 30 interviews were conducted, each lasting between 1 to 2 hours, and some follow-up interviews were conducted. If you do the maths, that's basically about 24 hours every day for 2 weeks interviewing and transcribing. Semi-structured interviews also have a tendency to be expensive, depending on the sort of equipment you're going to get to do your recording, or if you have to pay for telephone bills, or in the event you have to pay for a venue to conduct the interview, or in the event you have to be physically present at an interview place and it's across national borders, you might have to expend a lot of cost traveling. In our example paper, the interviews were conducted in Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, which would have involved a fair amount of traveling and telephone calls. Also, with the semi-structured interview, there's also the problem of interviewee familiarity. In the event the interviewer and interviewee have previously met each other and are quite familiar with each other, there's a tendency for the interviewee to tell you what he thinks you expect to hear. There's also the case where the interviewee would normally not be someone that would be interviewed, and you come up to him and say, oh, I'd like to interview you about such and such, and he's excited. He tends to display elaborate shows of friendship, tries to build a long-lasting relationship after the interview, and basically also tells you exactly what you want to hear. Okay, there are basically four criticisms of the semi-structured interview. The first of which is its subjectivity and transparency, which basically refers to the level of bias associated with results. In conducting a semi-structured interview, and if you look at the analysis of data gotten from the semi-structured interview, the researcher in no way explains the extent of why he chose a particular area, why he chose to follow a particular line of questions, or why he said, or what criteria he used to select his interviewees. A lot of this is subject to his personal bias. Also, in the event interviewer is using some sort of framework, and the interviewee says things that do not fit into that framework, it's up to the discretion of the interviewer to decide where what the interviewee is saying fits into that framework, which basically has a high level of subjectivity and transparency. Replicability refers to the repeatability of the study by someone else. Like I mentioned earlier with the framework, if the interviewer is going to use his discretion to decide where to put stuff in, what's the likelihood of someone else doing the same study using his discretion in the exact same way as the previous person did it to get the same results? The chances are quite slim. Also, in conducting the semi-structured interview, a lot of thought is put into into management of personal space, into into management of personal space, into the setting, into wearing the right clothes, into a whole range of other factors. Also, gestures and hesitation on the part of the interviewee also serve as some sort of input into the data collection process. And it's quite difficult to have an interviewee do the same gestures and hesitations in the exact same way twice. Validity. This basically refers to whether or not an indicator actually measures the concept it's designed to measure. As I mentioned earlier, if you're having difficulty, if your study is not capable of being repeated, chances are the validity is going to be questionable. Generalization, which refers to the applicability of the research findings in confines other than the context in which the research was conducted. The problem with semi-structured interviews, you interview a select few, and when interviewing this select few, you can't base the opinions of this select few and take it as one view. For instance, if a decision was to be made whether or not the research method module was to be scrapped, and you asked about 3 people, and they all said yes, they wanted it scrapped, they didn't like the module. You can't like take the opinion of those select few and say, okay, yeah, because 3 people said they want the module scrapped, therefore we're going to scrap the module. That's basically how a semi-structured interview works. You cannot take the views of a select few and generalize across the whole class. With all these limitations and criticisms, there are obviously areas in which the semi-structured interviews is well suited. For example, areas where the issues to be researched are resistant to observation or other methods. For instance, you're trying to research to find out why people are vegetarians. You won't want to go and do that through content analysis. No, you want to do that through a semi-structured interview and ask them, okay, why are you a vegetarian? How long have you been a vegetarian? What made you a vegetarian? It gives you a greater breadth of coverage because you can ask as many questions as you want. You also have flexibility. Also, semi-structured interviews are also useful when the focus is on idea generation rather than data collection. Although in some cases, a semi-structured interview could be used for data collection. That's basically the limitations, criticisms, and suitability of the semi-structured interview. I basically run through what everyone has talked about. Me has talked about the nature of business research and the context of the semi-structured interview. Toro has talked about research design. Jerry has talked about how data is collected, analyzed, and reported. And I've talked about how findings shape theory, limitations, criticisms, and suitability of the semi-structured interview. That's it for our presentation. We'll take any questions now.